So how do you start a jazz collection? What is the best way to get into collecting jazz records? If you're a jazz beginner, where do you start? Well, today I want to talk about that question. Not so much the answers, but the question itself. We'll get to some answers, but why do I keep hearing that question over and over? That's the big question. I heard that question 3 times in one weekend just a few days ago on Facebook, different Facebook forums. And you don't see that question being asked in other genres of music. I don't see anybody saying, I don't know anything about heavy metal, I want to get into it. What's the best 5 albums I should buy? I really want to get into bluegrass music. Where do I start? Maybe somebody's asking those questions, but I don't see it. So what is it about jazz that prompts that question so often, and what's the best way of answering it? That's what I want to talk about in this video. There's something different and special about jazz that makes it almost unknowable to people who really don't know it. But like this impenetrable wall, there is so much music to choose from, it can be intimidating. Where do you start? Jazz has been around over 100 years. The jazz age was in the 1920s, so there are so many different genres and styles and subgenres of jazz. It really is intimidating. Where do you start? Some people have said, you need to start by watching the Ken Burns documentary, 10 Episodes of Jazz. I don't necessarily think that's a great piece of advice because, that documentary starts at the very beginning, and it's not till episode 6 or 7 that you get into the LP era, Miles Davis and artists like that. The first 20, 30, 40 years of jazz was on 78 RPM record, which there was some great music being made then. But if you're a jazz collector, if you're new to jazz, you probably don't want to start with that sound, even though bebop is certainly a great genre itself. The funny thing is that jazz is one of the least popular genres of music. If you look at record industry statistics, only 1.7% of new record sales are jazz. That's right down there with classical, which is only 1%. But the popular forms of music, as you can imagine, hip-hop and rap and rock and pop, those 3 genres alone make up something like 60+% of all new music sales. So why are people interested in jazz? What makes people think they would even like jazz? That's another odd question. What is it about jazz that people who aren't into it think they might like it? And there's a good chance they won't like it if they have no experience with instrumental music. Do you like instrumental music? Because you're listening at a different level if you're listening to complex solos and melodies and different key changes and different chords you haven't heard before. That's almost an acquired taste that you have to sort of learn about to get into, and take it easy, I would say. So I'm actually going to take a look at the way this question was asked on Facebook the other day. Let's see if I can find it. We may have to pause the video. So here's literally a question that was asked on Facebook about a week ago, and it's already got over 250 responses. I'm going to read you a couple of them. I'm going to change the names to protect the guilty and paraphrase a little bit. Okay, jazz guys, I'm about to take the plunge. What are the first 10 records I should get? And one guy starts off right away with Miles Davis, Bitches Brew. Seriously? Go easy on the guy. Maybe start with something mellower like Birth of the Cool. Bitches Brew is a great monumental album, but very few people, it should be their first entree into jazz because they might run away screaming. Here's somebody who says, I don't know much about jazz, but Amy Winehouse is good. And somebody says, anything by Chet Baker. Get something by Wes Montgomery, Wayne Shorter, Jean-Luc Ponty, Louis Armstrong, Wynton Marsalis, not that popular with hardcore jazz people. And I really like Django Reinhardt. Those are all good artists, but he didn't ask for artists, he asked for records. So now you've given him a bunch of artists. Here's a great answer. The Analog Productions pressing of Hugh Masekela's Hope. Okay, that is so off the wall. Is that even, is it jazz? Who's going to start with a $60 record? Might be a great record. I want to check that record out, to be honest. Here's one. The Nordic Jazz Quintet. Really? Is that where you should start listening to jazz? I don't know. I know nothing about What is the Nordic Jazz Quintet? Okay, here's a very typical answer. Kind of Blue, Time Out, Anything by Ellington, Anything by Ella Fitzgerald, Travels by Pat Metheny, Favorite Things by Coltrane, Something Else by Cannonball, and Midnight Blue by Kenny Burrell. A lot of those are good suggestions, and I'm going to surprise you by saying that I think the Travels Pat Metheny is a different approach, but actually a very good first record for people who are coming to jazz from the rock world, because it's got guitar and pentatonic, easy, accessible melodics. But I would say if anybody's putting together one of these top 10 lists, they should be looking at other genres besides just 1950s hard bop. All right, here's another one. Where do I start? Dave Brubeck, Paul Desmond, Art Blakey, Cannonball, Mingus, Coltrane, Miles, Getz, Mulligan. Okay, he asked for albums. He didn't ask for artists. Don't forget, Basie Jam on Pablo is a must-have. Is that a must-have? I'm not sure. How about Think of One by Wynton Marsalis? Not that many hardcore jazz fans are that crazy about Wynton Marsalis, to be honest. Ask the Ages by Sonny Sharrock. That's a very bizarre answer. I like Sonny Sharrock, very out there, chaotic guitar player, very hard edge sound. Not the best starting place for most people coming into jazz, but if you're coming from listening to Robert Fripp, maybe that's the place to start. Here's an odd one. Start with 10 instruments. Blakey, Mingus, Monk, Miles, Coltrane, Wes Montgomery, Chet Baker, or Sarah Vaughan for vocals. Why 10 instruments? I have no idea. A couple of my faves, Miles, Bitches Brew, Coltrane, Sunship. So why is your favorites where somebody else should start? And here's my whole problem with the question is people are approaching the question completely wrong, in my opinion. Like, your favorites, I said, where do I start? And you said, well, here are my favorites. And, that's not the question. Where do I start? It's a very personal journey, and that's what I'm going to probably say too many times in this video. Your approach to jazz has to be your personal journey. Where do you start? And everybody here seems to think you should start at the top, which is bizarre. Chris Potter Underground. Love Chris Potter, English saxophone player. Got a bunch of his records. I don't know. His records are probably hard to find. Get something from Jimmy Smith. I like Jimmy Smith. Okay, here's the most sort of well thought out, well written, typical answer. Miles Davis, Kind of Blue. John Coltrane, Giant Steps. Lee Morgan, Sidewinder. Jimmy Smith, The Sermon. Ornette Coleman, The Shape of Jazz to Come. Dave Brubeck, Time Out. Sonny Rollins, Volume 2. I think that's Live at the Village Vanguard. Grant Green, Idle Moment. Is it Moments or Moment? Kenny Burrell, Midnight Blue. Art Blakey, Monin. Those are my top 10 jazz essentials. Those are great records. And if I was putting together a list of 10 great jazz records, that list is hard to argue with. He was specific, he gave great records, and he gave the artist and the name of the record, which most people didn't bother doing. So that's a nice list, except I have a problem with it, because if you're starting your journey, do you want to start at the top of the mountain? I mean, really? An analogy would be, you've never dated a girl before, but on your first date, you want to start with the girl you're going to marry and you want to consummate it on the first date. Is that really how to approach this? Really? Do you have to start at the best, or do you have to start at what's best for the person? So that's my whole problem with these lists. And you're probably going to see on my channel me doing a bunch of these lists, but my problem with these type of lists, everyone thinks the question is, what are your favorites? That's not what he asked. How do I begin? You got to start your own journey, and it really depends where you're coming from. What kind of music are you coming from? What do you like now? If you like funk and disco, you should start someplace different than if you like classical music, or if you like rap music, or if you like country music. All those types of listeners can find their own journey to jazz, but it's your journey. Why ask a bunch of yahoos on the internet? Let me look at a couple more responses from the group, but I think you're getting the idea of where I'm going with this. Here's a person who answered, my sort of journey thing. Jazz is a broad genre. I got into it from reggae, punk, progressive, electronics, and I started with new music, electronic, progressive stuff like the ECM catalog. Okay. I got into the ECM catalog way before I got into the Blue Note catalog because I was coming from classic rock, and I got into Pat Metheny, guitar-oriented, very accessible, and it took me a few years to get into the sort of Blue Note hard bop stuff. So some people, maybe jazz fusion is where they need to go. Then what? And a guy said, well, you should just see which suggestions came up most often and start with those. So you're telling the guy to create a spreadsheet? Seriously? He's supposed to go through, there's 250 answers here. Create a spreadsheet and pick the most popular answer? Is that helpful? I don't think so. And here's a great answer from somebody else. You should probably listen to some music and buy some things that you like instead of asking a bunch of random online dudes. There you go. That's the answer. It's your journey. I keep saying that. The journey is the destination. Was that the name of that book by Danny Eldon, or was it The Destination is the Journey? So on and on and on, people are giving the same sort of, here's my answer, here's what I think you should do. Here's a smart answer. Depends what else you're listening to. What are you into? We'll start from there. That's the right answer, guys. I don't mind these lists of, these are the top 10. And these are the essential albums for people who like jazz. But for someone who doesn't like jazz, I'm going to make one recommendation. This is one of my so-called top 5 all-time Blue Note records, and maybe one of the top 10 all-time essential jazz records, and it is on that list. And there are probably 10 other records that fit this bill, but I'm going to go with something else, 1595. It's the only record I know by catalog number. 1595, Cannonball Adderley. Some people call it a Miles Davis record. It's got Miles Davis, Hank Jones, Sam Jones, Art Blakey. And this is the not-so-great 75th anniversary pressing. Get the 80th anniversary pressing. Or just buy the CD if you're brand new. Why this record? Start with one record like this. Don't go out and buy 10. Buy this one. Or listen to it online. Listen to the whole record, beginning to end. Listen to it at least twice. If you can sit through that entire album twice and not dig it and not get into it, move on. Go back to heavy metal or opera or yodeling, I don't know what, but that's my advice. Not to take advice from random people off the internet. Find an authority who has thousands of subscribers. No, I'm just kidding. Take your own journey, see what you like, listen to some stuff online. Don't buy 10 or 20 records until you figured out if you have any appetite at all for instrumental music and improvisation and chord changes and the language of jazz. That's my advice, guys. This is Greg on the Vinyl Rundown. That's my channel. Feel free to subscribe, hit the like button, send me your good karma and wishes, and I will check you guys later. Thanks a lot.